Welcome to this channel. Sit comfortably and listen closely. Long ago, in a valley where the river moved slow and the mornings arrived with mist like a soft curtain, there lived a gardener named Raman. He was not a man of great wealth or loud ambition. He owned a small plot of land handed down by his grandfather, a thin ribbon of soil between the main road and the old tamarind grove. To the casual eye, it looked ordinary and often unimpressive, but Raman saw in it a quiet promise. He believed, the way children believe in bedtime stories, that the earth could be a patient ally, and that small, faithful acts, repeated, could change the face of a life. He planted vegetables and tended fruit trees, but what he cherished most were seeds, not merely seeds of crop, but seeds of possibility. He kept a little box under his bed where he stored unusual seeds given to him by travelers, old women from the market, and sometimes by poets who liked to speak in the language of roots. One autumn afternoon, an old monk came by the village. He carried a simple wooden staff and the kind of calm that makes birds stop mid-flight. The villagers gathered, as villagers do when someone new brings silence into their day, and he told small stories about forests and deserts and the curious things that grow when people tend them with patience. He handed Raman a handful of thin, dark seeds and said quietly, "These are bamboo seeds. Plant them and remember, if you water them, they will not rush into the light. They will build below where your eyes cannot see. If you quit too soon, you will think nothing grew. If you keep faith, one day the sky will be full of green." Raman took the seeds with a ceremony that belonged less to ritual and more to the feeling that something's weight had been placed in his hands. He planted them along the edge of his plot, close to the tamarind grove, pressing each seed into the soil with a thumb that knew how to measure hope by the softness of earth. He began his work. That is the easiest part to say and the hardest part to do. He watered the soil every morning and every evening, even when the rains failed for long local seasons and the well's bucket made a hollow sound. He cleared stones and pulled stubborn weeds that thought themselves entitled to the cover of his patience. Neighbors passed by and shook their heads. "Why waste that strip on bamboo?" some asked. "Plant corn, plant beans, they grow faster and pay your bills." Raman smiled and kept watering. He became known as the gardener who wasted his land on empty ground, so it seemed to them. Time settled into a rhythm of quiet repetition. Days folded into months, months folded into years. The seasons turned and gave him back the same plain earth as if mocking his diligence. Still he watered, raked, patrolled for pests, and covered the soil with compost. He hummed while he worked, small songs the way a clock ticks, a soft measure that kept him from noticing the passing of days as anything other than practice. In the village, there was no grand announcement. The absence of visible progress made Raman's work unremarkable. Children ran past the plot and made games of the bare patch. An elderly woman would sometimes sit by the tamarind and knit, muttering that the gardener had gone foolish with faith. Even his wife, Mira, grew worried. She loved him and loved eating, but was practical about bread. She would hand him the ledger of the household now and then and suggest planting something that would yield sooner. Raman would glance at the ledger with a gentle gravity and say, "We are planting roots." She could not see roots. She could see only an empty piece of land and a family who needed sustenance. Their neighbors neighed. Laughter, small and then louder, pressed against the edges of his conviction like wind against a sapling. Years 3 and 4 passed. The gardener's hands were calloused, his back accustomed to bending before the sun rose. He had many small harvests around the edges of his plot, but nothing from where he had planted bamboo. People's jeers sharpened into pity. "Why not sell the seeds and buy food?" a cousin asked. "You could use this money for the children's schooling." Raman's children were growing into teenagers who sometimes felt embarrassed by their father's insistence on an empty strip of land. Yet every morning he woke with the same serenity. He watered those seeds. He spread compost. He spoke kindly to the soil the way one might speak to an older friend who had lost their memory and needed patient reminders of who they were. Then in the 5th year, the weather changed in ways that no one could call small. The valley received a season of balanced rains, neither too much nor too little, as if the sky itself had learned to pace its giving. One dawn, Raman walked to his patch and, with a hand that had grown used to habitual gestures, felt something slightly cool and wet beneath his feet. He knelt. There, in a place that had appeared to hold nothing for years, was the first pale green of a shoot that had chosen the morning, finally to rise. It was small and miraculous in the way miracles always are, quiet, wholly ordinary until you name them. Raman sat for a long time, and as the light sharpened, one shoot became many. The few villagers who chanced upon him that morning saw the green tips, and one by one their eyes widened. What happened next was sudden in its speed, but not sudden in origin. The bamboo, after 5 years of building a network of strong roots under the soil, grew upward with a zeal that made men gasp. Where there had been an invisible effort, now there was visible triumph. The stalk shot up, tall and upright. Within a season, what had looked empty before now rose like a green cathedral along the edge of that old tamarind grove. It shaded the ground. It made a sound in the wind like a choir. The same neighbors who had once mocked found themselves standing in quiet, whereas awkward with the recognition that they had been wrong to measure living things by immediate convenience. Raman's wife wept when she first saw the tall stems moving together in the breeze and the way their leaves caught light. She remembered the man who had whispered to the soil and felt gratitude that was nearly the color of the new shoots. The children, those who had once been embarrassed, ran along the rows and felt for the first time that wonder belonged to them as well. The lesson, when the village told it after, bent many ways. Some said it was the simplest moral. Patience pays. Others named it as fate aligning with discipline. Raman, seated on a bench made from the earliest bamboo, told the children in simple language, "You must understand this. Nothing miraculous happened overnight. The miracle was not the suddenness, but the years of quiet preparation. Those roots fed the shoots. They held the plant steady. The world saw only the green part, but the green part could not have stood without what the soil built quietly for years." That season, the region's newspapers did not come to praise Raman, but people came from nearby villages because stories travel in the bellies of travelers before they reach printed pages. They wanted to see the bamboo that had chosen, after a long period of invisible work, to rise into the sky. We can tell this story as a parable and leave it at that. But the deeper living of it is in how it maps onto human lives. There are careers that appear overnight to the public, but only because a person has been relentlessly learning, making mistakes, and perfecting the craft away from view. There are relationships that seem to blossom in a week, But their roots were made by polite acts and griefs, and the hours of showing up. Consider the young teacher who tutors after school and grows into a principal because no one watched all the evenings she spent making plans, or the musician who today stands on a large stage because he practiced scales in a dark room for 10 years. The bamboo's 5 invisible years are the apprenticeship we all must undergo if our lives are to hold the weight of larger things. It is not just patience, it is the quality of what you do in the waiting. The gardener did not water because he believed that watering in and of itself was reward. He watered because his daily work built the conditions for a future he could not yet name. His habit disciplined him. His discipline made the roots possible. There is another layer often missed. The bamboo's growth requires vulnerability. To build roots means to be anchored in a way that allows growth upward. The gardener had to remove stones and pests to turn the soil, to allow the tiny rootlets to reach deeper. In human terms, this involves pruning, letting go of insecure friendships, of quick-fix comforts, of the desire for immediate praise. It might mean saying no to a moment's pleasure so that the long-season project can mature. That is the kind of cost that people dislike naming, because it is quieter than dramatic sacrifices, but equally consequential. When the bamboo rose and grew strong, Raman did not rest on the leaves of his victory. He built a small nursery by the grove so that children could learn the names of plants and the feel of soil in their palms. He taught them how to plant for the future and how to measure success not by overnight headlines, but by the ability to stand when storms come. The nursery became a place where the villagers learned to start projects and see them through. They planted fruit trees and shade trees and, mindful of the bamboo's story, considered not only what bore fruit quickly, but what would bind the soil, make the village cooler, and make their children's afternoons better years from now. The economy of patience began to shape other decisions. Farmers planted hedges that held back erosion. Small shop owners saved a little more for the slow months. A young seamstress began taking extra lessons after she closed her stall, learning tailoring techniques that would make her a master in time. A culture of deferred gratification began to take root, not as ascetic denial, but as a practical ethic. Build the foundation first, and the structure will stand. The story also shows us the hazard of comparison. Many villagers compared Raman's empty patch to their own immediate yields and called him foolhardy. But the mistake many of them made is the one that plagues human lives. Measuring our inner slow work against the visible success of another. Comparison can paralyze us into giving up or, alternatively, push us into foolish haste. Raman did not look at his neighbor's quick harvests with envy. He saw them, tended his patch, and trusted the kind of time that cannot be rushed. He did not know what shape the bamboo's great trunk would take, only that if he kept giving what was required, the plant would grow in the season meant for it. In our own lives, this suggests that when you are in a season of learning, do not trade your discipline for the appearance of progress. There is also a communal lesson. The bamboo's eventual presence changed the village's microclimate. It gave shade and privacy and the soft music of rustling leaves where children played and elders met. When the community learned patience, the social fabric benefited. The little acts of deferred reward were public goods. A family's decision to save and educate a child, for instance, might not pay off directly for decades, but it benefits the whole village. The bamboo did not grow for Raman alone. It grew as a gift to the place, offering a bench, a screen, and a flute-like voice in the wind. Likewise, when we anchor our lives in steady practices, good work, civility, education, we are not merely carving out future happiness for ourselves, but also creating conditions for others to thrive. Of course, myths and life rarely match perfectly. There are seasons when roots fail, seeds rot, wells dry, and storms uproot what we cherish. The gardener's story is not immune to failure. Some seedlings that receive care never grow. That reality asks us a delicate question: why keep trying? The answer is twofold. First, because the attempt itself builds qualities, resilience, skill, humility, that matter irrespective of a final outcome. Second, because probability acknowledges that although not every seed will flourish, the accumulative chance increases with disciplined effort. In other words, long, faithful work does not guarantee success on its own, but it tilts the world toward possibility. Raman knew this with a kind of knowledge that was not theoretical, but felt in his bones. Care is itself a noble occupation. When people visit the old grove now, they do not merely point at the bamboo. They talk about the process, the long winters, the compost piles, the times when the gardener sat down and cried because he felt foolish. They recount how his children brought him water and how Mira, who once worried, now taught other women how to cook bamboo shoots into stew and bread. The family's social standing shifted not as the result of instant fortune, but because their patience provided a lasting resource. The bamboo's value was not simply monetary. It became cultural capital, a story to tell and a moral to pass on. To take this further into a modern frame, imagine a young software engineer who spends years learning obscure algorithms, debugging at night while friends go out and buy things, and is told to choose a more immediately lucrative job. Or imagine an activist who invests decades in community organization, facing ridicule from pundits who measure impact in quarterly headlines. These are modern bamboos, root building that will only become visible when the conditions align. A new market, a new law, a societal shift. We honor the hidden labor when we choose not to deride it, but to support it. So what should you do if your life feels like Raman's empty plot? First, mark your work. Small milestones anchor us. Measure what you are doing in ways that do not rely on external applause. Keep a notebook of hours practiced, skills learned, people helped. Second, cultivate daily habits that are sustainable. The bamboo did not ask for heroics. It required steady watering. Third, remove what ruins root growth. Toxic relationships, time wasters, illusions that success must always arrive in a single burst. Fourth, find community. Have one person who can remind you why you began when you feel foolish. The gardener had Mira, and that mattered. Fifth, remember, sometimes the world will never acknowledge all your work. That is not a failure. It is part of being human. Plant anyway. When the bamboo grew and shaded the village, Raman no longer felt foolish. He felt grateful. He often sat beneath the swaying leaves and told children that the most miraculous things in life require time and tenderness. He liked to add one sentence for them to repeat aloud: roots first, then wings. Enough people began to say those words that they slipped into songs and lullabies and ended up saving others from impatience. If you are listening to this story because you are in a season of invisible work, hear this as a patient exhortation. Keep tending. Keep learning. Keep the faith of small actions. The breakthrough, when it comes, will not just be a reward. It will be evidence that what you did, even when unseen, was not wasted. The bamboo did not defy the laws of nature. It simply followed its own slow logic, and when conditions aligned, the result was breathtaking. Your life's bamboo moment may arrive after years of humble, unnoticed effort, but that moment will be sturdy precisely because it grew from a fortified root system. Thank you for listening to this retold bamboo tree story. If it moved you, if it steadied something inside, do not forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs patience today, comment below with your own bamboo moment,